So one of the main things that brought Alaudin and me together on this project and that drove the film from beginning to end over almost 2 decades that we were working on it was the conviction that the story of South Asians in the United States was glaringly incomplete. In the 1990s when we met, and arguably still to this day, the South Asian American narrative has too often centered on the doctors, engineers, and business professionals who came here in large numbers, predominantly from India, as a result of the 1965 Immigration Act, and then later the tech entrepreneurs and tech CEOs who have come to prominence since the 1990s. Their stories of mainstream recognition and material success has crowded out and obscured other South Asian lives, experiences, struggles, stories, and in fact, entire histories. When we met, Alaudin didn't know a lot of details about his father's early life, but knew for certain that his father's story was different and that it was invisible, not just to mainstream America, but to other South Asian communities. And when I started investigating in the archives, it didn't take long to figure out that Alaudin's father's story was just the tip of the iceberg, that working class South Asian and particularly Bengali Muslim men had been living and working in New York City, not just in significant numbers, but continuously for more than a century. So, for example, it's clear now that men from villages in Sylhet, Noakhali, and Chittagong have been working in New York City restaurants as dishwashers, line cooks, and cooks for more than 100 years. And a good half-century before the doctors, engineers, and professionals who have now become the face of South Asian America. And just as importantly, the lives of working class South Asian immigrants and their children have been entwined with the lives of other immigrant and BIPOC New Yorkers. All of our panelists tonight are part of that legacy, that 100-year history that has been here in New York City all along, hidden in plain sight. So I'd like to introduce our guests. City Council member Shahana Hanif made history in 2021. As the first Bangladeshi and Muslim woman elected to the New York City Council, representing District 39 in Brooklyn. Anyone from the district? Okay. Currently chairing the Council's Committee on Disabilities and Accessibility, her advocacy is rooted in personal experience. Diagnosed with lupus at 17 and later denied access, she witnessed firsthand the barriers facing New Yorkers with disabilities. During her tenure, she has passed landmark legislation, expanding abortion access, advancing climate justice, strengthening worker protections, and investing in domestic violence survivor safety. In 2025, she was re-elected to serve her final term. Miguel Mickey Melendez was co-founder of the Young Lords in New York City. He was one of the leaders of the takeover of Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx on July 14th, 1970, which gave birth to New York's Patient Bill of Rights. And was spokesperson for the 1977 Puerto Rican nationalist takeover of the Statue of Liberty, in which the Puerto Rican flag was draped on her crown. And you should look up those photographs. He is author of the 2003 memoir, We Took the Streets, fighting for Latino rights with the Young Lords, and was featured in and consulting producer for the 2021 documentary Takeover, directed by Emma Francis Snyder. Javaid Tariq is a co-founder and senior staff member of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. And treasurer of the National Taxi Workers Alliance. Tariq was born in Pakpatan in Punjab, Pakistan. As a college student, he was active in the student movement against the military dictatorship. He migrated to Germany and later to the United States in 1990. Over the years, he has organized numerous successful strikes, campaigns, and actions to promote economic and social justice for taxi drivers, a workforce that is 94% immigrant and primarily people of color. Rebecca Chowdhury organizes neighbors and volunteers at Drum. She creates ways for upper and middle class New Yorkers to support their working class immigrant neighbors and fight together for a city where we can all live with dignity. She's worked as a Bangla interpreter for working class Bangladeshis in social justice spaces for over 10 years. She was previously a freelance journalist covering grassroots organizing against state violence. And Rebecca at the end has some flyers to pass out to everyone. Alaudin Ullah, who you got to know.
I want to know what you wrote.
Is an actor, playwright, and filmmaker. As a member of the Public Theater's inaugural Emerging Writers Group, he wrote plays about Harlem and Bangladesh. His solo play Dishwasher Dreams premiered at Chicago's famed Writers Theater and at Hartford Stage, where he won the Connecticut Critics Circle Award for Best Solo Performance. He co-starred in the film American Desi and did several voices in the award-winning animated Sita Sings the Blues. Ullah is a graduate of Columbia University's MFA playwriting program, where he studied with Lynn Nottage and David Henry Wong. I think it's worth going through all of these incredible biographies because, as I said, the people sitting here are part of a continuous history, carrying on a history that Alaudin's father was part of, and that we felt deserved the light of day. So I'm going to start with some general questions. Well, actually, I'm going to start with Spanish Harlem in the time that Alaudin's father and others moved there. So this is a question for Mickey. One thing that was really striking to me in my archival research was that in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, when white New Yorkers were writing about Harlem, they did so as if it was a single monolithic group of black and brown folks, or in the language of that time, Negro New York is often what they called it. But what I saw in the census records was, of course, very different. I'd find in one building, I'd find an apartment with 3 or 4 Bengali Muslim men, and then in the rest of the building, African-American families and boarders from Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and then immigrants from Jamaica, from Trinidad, from Barbados. In another building on the east side, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban, African-American, all living together in these apartments, sharing the blocks, sharing the neighborhoods. So I wanted to just ask to start with, what was the Harlem that Alaudin's father and his generation came to, what was it like? And then perhaps we could segue into talking about your own personal connections to the Bengalis in East Harlem.
Sure, thank you. The Harlem of that time was primarily Puerto Rican. As a colony of the United States, it was considered the second migration when the United States wanted to move and industrialize Puerto Rico from an agricultural society to an industrial society. So for 10 years, an average of 50,000 Puerto Ricans were moved to the United States. It's called Operation Bootstraps. And when we arrived in this community, a community where your neighbor was African American because of the migrations that took place after the Depression to the north. East of 2nd Avenue, there was an Italian neighborhood. Let me say also that East Harlem was the second largest Puerto Rican community in the United States. The first Puerto Rican community in the United States was the earlier migration of the 20s and 30s, which was in Brooklyn, because that's where the USS Marine Tiger used to dock, and people just kind of stayed in South Brooklyn, which is still a vibrant Puerto Rican community. So there was this great mixture of people, and people from East Pakistan were there at the time prior to 1971 when it became Bangladesh. So it was this just great cross-section of different cultures. And, for our music, the influence in Latin music at the time was really jazz. And that's why, the early Latin music is big band style. Like the Dizzy Gillespie bands and Louis Armstrong bands. So there was this kind of cross-cultural and cross-pollination of cultures going on there. My particular intersectionality with this community starts in my high school days on a subway. When I'm going to high school and there's this young lady, in the same car, and, just keep looking, and you make sure that you're on the same car and the same train the following day because you just want to continue to see this, young woman until you get some signal that it's okay to talk. So I got the signal, and we started talking, and, so I asked her for her name, and she says, "My name is Mutin." And she looked Puerto Rican to me. I said, "Well, what's your last name?" And she said, "Mia." And I said, "Mia?" I said, "It didn't sound like Gonzalez or Rios or Melendez to me." I said, "What's that from?" So, well, my father's from East Pakistan and my mother is Puerto Rican. Fast forward, she takes me to meet her father, Mosodol Mia, and I consider myself a Cuban Rican, which means I come from a mother that's Cuban and a father that's Puerto Rican, Cuban Rican. So she takes me to go meet her father, and they serve curry, and there's rice. And I said, well, this is okay, I know rice, And then I have this great curry, I've been eating mulgi curry since I was like 16 years old. Besides black beans, those of you that know the Cuban culture, we're first black beans. My second go-to food is curry and mulgi curry. And then in my senior year of high school, and he was also kind of, your father reminds me a lot of him because he was very entrepreneurial. He used to come and people used to arrive and he used to help people and introduce them to a community of people that a lot of times they became wives of these people, of these young men coming here. And he was helped them also develop restaurants, in particular in East Harlem. So in my senior year, just before I go to college, he gets a chance to open up his own restaurant in Raj Mahal on 4th Avenue between 13th and 14th Street. I think it's a pizzeria now. And then in the summer that I get really dark because my DNA goes to, all our DNA goes to, I worked at the restaurant just before going to college. Besides Mutin had a sister, Dulesa Mia, a younger sister, and an older sister from a previous marriage, Connie. During that late 60s and early 70s, we're influenced by the civil rights movement the Black Civil Rights Movement. And we're reading the Black Panther paper, and in the Black Panther paper, there's development of the Rainbow Coalition that was started by Fred Hampton. People think of the Rainbow Coalition as something that Jesse Jackson did, but there was a previous Rainbow Coalition. And this Rainbow Coalition included the Young Lords, the Young Patriots, which was a white Appalachian revolutionary group, AIM, the American Indian Movement, the Brown Berets, Iwakung, the Asian organizations. And we just, went to Chicago and basically asked if we could become the Young Lords in New York City. We came back to New York City, we became the Young Lords, and I'm gonna end with this, is that there were Puerto Rican Bangladeshis in the Puerto Rican movement. In addition to the Young Lords was 25 to 30% African American. And the last thing I'd like to say is it's important to know your history, because if you know your history, no one can lie to you. And when you learn your history, respectfully learn other histories of other people.
So, Alaudin, there are a couple of stories that we've talked about a lot that didn't make it into the film. And one of them that I'd like to ask you to share is what you described to me as one of your earliest memories, walking with your father through East Harlem and then going with him to the Lower East Side. And can you tell me a bit about his world that you witnessed at a really young age? Because, I was thinking about, it takes a lot of will for a child that young to remember, to continue to remember, so that, those walks must have been really significant.
Yeah, sometimes I even have dreams about some of those walks. They were early 70s. I think it was like 1973, because that's the year that the Mets lost. So I remember, it's the only way I remember history, man. So like 72, 73, 74, I would hold my father's hand, and I felt like my early childhood, I was in those restaurants. And there was Said Ali's on 109th. There was, I forgot his name, on 110th. And there was also Ishad Ali on the 125th Street. So I would always tag along, and I would get free food. And I felt like these were the pockets of Bengali men that were in East Harlem. There was another guy, Paul, I think on 103rd, 104th, who had a hardware store, had these two big German shepherds. And so I remember these Bengali men, and I felt like that was a world that was sort of like underground. And it was almost like when they worked in the restaurant, they had to present themselves in front of like customers. But when my father walked in, it was almost like they just was like, baya, boshen, get on us. Like it just felt like they kind of relied on each other. And those Saturday mornings, it would be a drag because I wanted to watch Saturday morning cartoons, but my father would drag me, and we would go all over East Harlem and Harlem. And then there were some Saturdays that we would take the 6 to Bleecker and catch the F, and we would go to like in the Lower East Side where his friends were, who were still living in the Lower East Side, like on Rivington and whatnot. And he knew my father knew all of the men that owned like Katz's Deli, Russ and Daughters. So we used to get the hookup with pastrami and Katz's and all that. And then he knew all the Jewish merchants. So I got a Robin doll and, so my father had the hookup with all of these men, and not realizing at the time that he had formed these relationships with them. And so the Pakistan League of America was in the Lower East Side, and my father would always say, well, that's what this happened, that's what that happened. And I was thinking, are we gonna get a pastrami sandwich? Can I get a Batman? I wasn't paying attention to any of that. So I do recall my father had this, he loved like telling those stories because he had no one to tell him to. But I remember before he had the stroke, he used to love traveling. So that's what I was telling Vivek. These are memory stories. They're not in any book. I mean, Vivek got it now in a book. But I mean, up until then, the problem that I was having is that you graduate, here's what happened, right? We did American Daisy. Push is in the house, the director of American Daisy. He's somewhere here. So I was spoiled because when we did he's somewhere here. Round of applause for Push. So that was like the first like indie film that I did, and it was just a great experience. It was like other Desis, we were like hanging out, and I thought every set was gonna be like that. But because I played Professor Gautam, they had me coming in and reading terrorists and cab drivers, and I'm like, why? And I would tell the director like, yo man, most Muslims didn't come to this country to like join terrorist group. They were like dishwashers, and they owned restaurants. The whole the culinary it started by Bangladeshis. He was like, yeah, just read the sides. So I realized that I was never going to read for those parts. I was never going to have any, dignity. And that's when Paul Mooney, who was Richard Pryor's writer, he said, you need to go back to New York and tell that story because no one's telling that story. And so that's how it led me to Vivek. And I just felt like these stories that my father used to tell me, and the last thing, which was kind of funny, when 1971 went down, it was like when they killed the prime minister in 74, they were like, there was a war. I remember because Chacha Chaudhry and Mosul, they'd be in the living room, like sitting me down, like, you have to understand, Bangladesh, we fought for independence, for the right to speak Bangla. You have to learn Bangla. And I'd have my basketball going, are you done? I got to play 5-on-5 outside. And they would be so upset that I wasn't absorbing this. But like, my father told all these stories as he was holding my hand, and when I would go to see Said Ali and Ishad Ali, they were telling me these stories. So it was in my memory, but it didn't quite marinate because I was a baby at that time.
Okay, I'm going to move to the 1990s, and then we'll go on to the early 2000s. Javaid. When the Taxi Workers Alliance was formed, it was formed out of initially the Lease Drivers Coalition, which was a predominantly South Asian organization. It was a smaller one. And then when Pervez Desai remade the organization, as the Taxi Workers Alliance, within a very short period of time, between 1997 and 1998, right? This small South Asian organization became a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual mass movement that shut down the city with the taxi strike of 1998. So how did that happen? How did this small South Asian organization cross all of those lines that were, between the different ethnicities that people would have assumed were just uncrossable?
I just gonna start from 1996 when actually I started driving in 1994 taxi because I was studying photography in New School, and one day I saw a picture of a lot of deceased cab drivers on a newspaper, and mostly were South Asian, Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi. And that occurred in my mind that these people are half world away, living here, working very hard, earning some money and sending remittance back home. When they died, what happened to back their families? So I thought my project, my photography project, to do about cab driver's life. But I cannot just go and take photographs. So I made my TLC license and I start driving by myself, cab, and I have my camera with me. And I mingle up with them and always listening their story and taking photographs. And meanwhile, one day I met Pervez Desai, who was working on a project called Lease Driver Coalition. That at that time, a lot of police brutality against cab drivers, a lot of robberies were happening. And that project, she wanted to help drivers, but sitting in office, nobody can come and help us. So she was coming out, she started talking to the driver, and then she find out, without any mass gathering or membership, driver has to stand up by themselves, then it can be changed. So one day I met her and she invited me to a meeting where was our third co-founder, Biju Matthew, who is a professor. He was there too. So when we start talking about cab drivers' life and what their problems, and then I share my experience also, and we made a team. We start organizing driver. Mostly we were going, that at that time Houston and Broadway, that was a hub of a night shift change, because a lot of Brooklyn Pakistani drivers come from Brooklyn to Broadway and Lafayette, where day driver 5 p.m. change their shift. So we start talking to them and try to organize them. And then we made a plan when Giuliani, who I always talk that he was a fascist bear in New York City. Yeah, that's true. He started cracking down vendors, CUNY students, cab drivers, and social welfare people. So we were the first people in August 1997 who had motorcade at that time. We were thinking like 200-300 cabs gonna be, but we did a lot of flying. At that time, we have our CB radio in our cab. So people have different channels, different ethnic group, they have different channels. Like Pakistani have a different channel, Punjabi people have different channel. Like that, was all day long they were communicating through the CB radio. So there were so many advertisements happen. Instead of few hundred, there are thousands of yellow cab came, and we have a motorcade all the way from Avenue D to Union Square and Union Square back to the City Hall. From there, where Bedwi was working and that project, they didn't wanted us to do any this kind of mass membership. So Bedwi resigned from there. We didn't have any office, nothing. We were having a meeting in some ethnic restaurants. And sometimes she has to stand up on the hood of cab and talking to the driver through CB radio. She was conveying her message to the cab drivers, and the other drivers were telling to other groups. That's the way we start building up slowly. In 1998, we incorporated as a 501c3, New York Taxi Worker Alliance. We didn't have any money. We were chipping up from our own pocket, making a flyers, and we did a lot of flying. We were going airports, LaGuardia Airport, JFK Airport, and talking to the driver. At that time, we see there was a lot of a hatred between Pakistani and Indian drivers. When you go at JFK Airport a lot, you will see that different ethnic groups were standing different places. They don't talk to each other. At that time, because 1998 was the time when India and Pakistan both were making a nuclear weapon. And there was a lot of hatred between each other. But we bring them together. We did that in 1998. We had a historic strike in New York City, and we planned that with the Pakistani people are cab driver, you don't need to talk to other Pakistani driver. If you stand on a red light, see left or right. If there is another ethnic person, other community person, talk to him, not to your own Pakistan. That's the way you spread your message that we all have the same problem, and we are living in America, forget back home politics, that we have to fight together. So in the beginning, we have system of organizing committee member who are the very active member with us from different ethnic groups. So that was their duty, that they should bring our message to their own community. So that's the way we start building up slowly. And it took us 30 years where we have now a big name. We are 57th National Union of AFL-CIO. And this is the only one union which is not covered by the Department of Labor. Understand? And thank you. So now we have 30,000 members. we are not only for yellow cab representative, any driver, because we all have the same license, Uber driver, Lyft driver, green cab driver, yellow cab driver, they all are our members. And we have a lot of benefit for the drivers. We completely run 85% of our budget come through the membership, driver pay their membership. That gave us responsibility to help them. And they can also ask us that we are paying you our membership, why you are not helping us. So that kind of thing we started, and now we are bringing our name up, and we are fighting for justice, rights, respect, and dignity. That's the way we build up our union. Thank you.
Rebecca, could you speak a bit about the origins of drum, which was, if I remember right, was started in 2000? What were the needs within the community that were not being met? What were the sort of commitments and strategies of drum as it was starting, and then how has that shifted over time? We spoke before, and you mentioned various different campaigns and various different coalitions, et cetera.
Yeah, so Drum, before I get to the actual founding of Drum, I think I'd start in 1999 when Amadou Diallo was killed in New York City. This was he was entering his apartment building, and the police told him to put his hands up, and he reached for his wallet, and they shot him 41 times. And after that, in New York City, there was 41 days of action, and one of those actions took place in Jackson Heights, around what's now Diversity Plaza. And when that action happened in like a South Asian neighborhood in Jackson Heights, a lot of the folks who organized it later went on to then found Drum. And that's one of the stories we start with, especially when orienting our members who are working class South Asians and Indo-Caribbeans across New York City. So like, like Lyft and Uber drivers, construction workers, restaurant workers, home care workers, and like folks who stay at home, take care of their families too. And a lot of the folks that came out of that, it was clear that we needed a working class South Asian organization rooted in organizing. And after that, 9/11 hit. And when 9/11 happened, a lot of our community members were deported, were lining up for registrations, were being attacked in the streets. And a lot of what Drum did in that time, the ED at the time, Monami, had started a hotline that we advertised throughout the different neighborhoods, and that hotline was functioning out of her living room, and the phones were going off nonstop with calls of people, children calling saying like, my dad was picked up in an unmarked vehicle and I don't know where he is and I haven't heard from him in 2 weeks. And so, a lot of those legacies from that moment really resonate now with things that are happening, like with ICE and the kidnappings and stories we've heard out of like Minneapolis or Corona or Sunset Park. But in that era, in the post 9/11 period, it was a lot of like figuring out where were people being taken. Drum volunteers at the time were going into detention centers to find people and then to be able to let their family members know, okay, like this is where your father is, he's in this detention center. And there was a lot of organizing at the time, like they had a protest in Union Square where some of the family members of those who were detained and were kidnapped spoke out about what was happening. And the reality was with that work, it was really difficult, it was really intense, and a lot of the people who are part of Drum's membership ended up either being deported and then their families choosing to go back with them. And that's what happened to a lot of people at the time. A lot of our community members were, taken in unmarked vehicles, kidnapped, and then in these detention centers, and then left without much of a choice to go back. And then their family members were left in a really tough position of, how do I support myself when my breadwinner's been, kidnapped? Very similar to situations, right, folks are facing now in Corona and in Sunset Park and throughout New York City and the country. And so after that, we'd made shifts in our organizing model and moving towards a membership model. And I'm gonna skip over a bunch of years to the present of Drum. And we have 6 bases across New York City. And so they're throughout working class South Asian neighborhoods. And part of what we realized is that we really need a membership model. Like we need our folks to be involved in the work and to run the base and to move the work forward, and we invest in their leadership so they're able to do that. And so what that means practically is that, for example, if you go to one of our meetings, well, I mean, that's only if you're working class, but our meetings that take place in Kensington, Shahana's district, in Brooklyn has about like 60 to 80 people that attend every single month. And every single month in those meetings, we talk about different topics. Like last month, we talked about ICE and the SALUTE acronym, like how to report ICE if you see them in a way that actually like spreads awareness and not panic. And we went into the difference between different officers and how you spot them. And within those meetings, you know, it's led by our members. Our members are the ones facilitating the meetings. That meeting takes place entirely in Bangla. A lot of the people who come are construction workers and whose families are back home, right? They send their remittances back. And yeah, so that's just a snippet of what the work looks like. You know, we have a lot of campaigns that we work on and have worked on historically. In 2020, when COVID hit, we worked on the Excluded Workers Fund. Do folks know what that is? Folks are the Excluded Workers Fund? All right, no reaction, great. I'm taking that as a no. So the Excluded Workers Fund in 2020 was, a lot of people were getting unemployment at the time. Folks, right, COVID hit, a lot of people were getting unemployment. People who were undocumented did not qualify for any form of financial assistance. Folks who were undocumented, folks who were cash economy workers. And so DRUM, along with like multiple other organizations, right, we created a coalition to fund the excluded workers. And through the work of like our leaders, folks from Make the Road. It was a very multiracial coalition. I'm not gonna list all the works, I'm gonna forget folks. But it was all these workers coming together, realizing that, you know, like unless we fight for something, we're literally not going to survive this pandemic. And at that point, a lot of our members were deciding between, do we pay for food or do we pay for rent? What do we do? And the result of that campaign, they shut down bridges, they had a hunger strike, they had protests throughout, as that they secured the nation's first financial assistance fund for undocumented workers. And yeah. Yes, and it was 2.2 million, I want to say. And it was billions, right? Oh, my bad, thanks, Shahana. Yeah, it was 2.2 billion. And yeah, so it was a huge victory, and it was also a testament to the history that our people have had of like working class organizing and cross-racial solidarity. I think another contemporary example of that is a few weeks ago, we had a rally for Win Rosario, who was killed by the NYPD 2 years ago. He was 19 years old. His family had called for an ambulance. Instead, police officers showed up and they killed him within a few minutes of entering their home in front of his mother and younger brother. It was, you know, huge tragedy. The family has been fighting for justice since then. And we had a rally to commemorate 2 years of the family fighting for justice and 2 years of Win not being with us anymore, even though he should be. And his family is Bangladeshi, they're Christian, and they've been leading this fight. And we had members, you know, our members from Midwood, where we now have a base after a very long time. We have a base again in Midwood. That neighborhood was devastated by 9/11 deportations, right? It was ground zero for surveillance. When Giuliani, right, the fascist mayor, was surveilling Muslims, that was all in Midwood. And that community has so much trauma and surveillance trauma from it. And we restarted a base there probably a few years ago, and our members in Midwood were like, no, they had a full day of meetings. They were like, we have to go to this rally. We have to stand with the Rosario family, because what happened to them could happen to any of us if we call 911 and someone's having a mental health emergency. And so that, you know, it was a really important rally, and that fight for justice continues. And the family of Javaid Tariq was also there. Javaid, his family similarly called for an ambulance, and the NYPD came and shot him within 30 seconds of entering their home. And it was a really powerful moment to see the families of the Chakrabortis and the Rosarios stand together and be supported by not only by our members who are, you know, South Asian Indo-Caribbean, but also by our neighbors and volunteers. So DRUM now has openings for people who want to support movement organizations. Even if you're not working class, even if you're not South Asian, you can still support our movements, because in this moment in history, we all need to doing the most to fight back against the fascists.
Okay. Shahana, when we had a chance to speak earlier, you described your childhood in Kensington as insular, and you told me about this trajectory that you went through. Can you describe how and why you carved a path that has been anything but insular? What set you on that path, and who became your teachers and mentors?
Thank you. First, I just want to thank everybody on this panel. I am so emotional from the film and just listening to the histories and knowing that our leaders are alive. I mean, it's very special, and I think we take that for granted. And I just want to say, the film makes me cry so much. This was the third time that I watched it, and I am still like, I'm like crying inside because I want to hold myself together. So, grew up in Kensington, born and raised, huge Bangladeshi enclave from the early 80s. My father was also a ship jumper. He worked on a ship. When it docked, he and a few others said, we're gonna stay here. They started their journey in Crown Heights, and then somehow Kensington was where they all ended up living, and were the foundation for getting halal meat to the neighborhood, having Bangladeshi vegetables in the neighborhood. My father was also very civically engaged. He was a fervent Awami League supporter, and also from Chittagong. So they had two associations, one for the Awami League support, and then one for the Chittagong community. And so I grew up seeing a very active father pouring in money to bring community together. And growing up, like Alaudin, like I felt like, why are we being dragged to all these events where kids don't have a space to participate, or we don't know really what's going on, and then so few women. I mean, my mother was probably among the few that was always present with my father, and similar to my father, my mom, very jubilant and exuberant personality, and she was foundational to ensuring that Bangladeshi families had access to the public school system and walked them through interpretation on just issues that rose up. And my sister and I, Sabia, we were like her secretary. We were her side interpreters, you know? So I saw a gender segregated community. I saw a household where surveillance was not just the police apparatus or the state, it was my parents. And you know, my sister and I, we were rebels. I mean, we were artists. We knew that we needed to be outside. We wanted to sing and to make friends. I mean, she and I were also sort of a team, tag team. She's more extroverted than I am. And so it was just sort of trying to find how in this home where we're not allowed to go anywhere, or if we're going somewhere, my father has to drive us. We never took the train because they just thought that boys like were everything. And, but it was wrapped around Islam. It was wrapped around Muslim identity. And so that was the struggle and the tension growing up. And where I live, we're surrounded by 4 mosques. And these are 4 mosques that are very insular, and back in the day, no women's spaces. And to this day, the spaces that are carved out for women are still under construction. And so, like, observing these, the dynamics, but very intuitively. And then 9/11, I think, is when I felt like, okay, what is my role as a 10-year-old? Which no 10-year-old should have to think about. And the kids in the neighborhood and we had gathered because we noticed at PS 230 we were getting bullied. There was no acknowledgement that the Muslim community was hurting or that the Muslim community was being targeted. And we all gathered and we wrote a letter to then President Bush saying, listen, we had nothing to do with this. Like, we want a childhood. We want our families to be safe. So that awareness was there from 10 onwards. And I would say that a generation, the peers that grew up during that time have the backdrop of 9/11 as a perspective of how New York City was abandoning Muslims and South Asians and how there were so few resources, protections, on and on and on. And then fast forward, I'm 17, I get diagnosed with lupus, and at home, the illness is just stigmatized. Nobody wants me to tell anybody. My relatives in Bangladesh were like advising my parents, don't tell anybody because she's gonna have a hard time getting married. So the stigma and just the bodily autonomy, not feeling that I don't own my body, was another element of just belonging in this community where I felt like everyone else was telling me how to be and what to do with my body. I couldn't be the one to decide. And then in navigating the healthcare system, we didn't have health insurance. I hopped from hospital to hospital because my condition was so severe. And my parents didn't understand lupus, nor did I, but having to very quickly translate and describe, here's what lupus is going to do to our household. This is a lifelong illness. This is degenerative. And I felt very strongly that I wanted my parents to be outspoken that I am going through this because we struggled through the hospital care system. We struggled to get Accessoride, which is the city's paratransit services. I was denied and I had to wait 1 year to reapply, which meant I was spending thousands, hundreds of dollars on cab services to go to my appointments. So that inaccessibility, the transit inaccessibility, the city service inaccessibility, language access issues, and then feeling insecure around my body, desire, and what does it mean to be a young South Asian woman growing up in Brooklyn? And all of that really pushed me to, I started off as a blogger. I mean, you could say like the early influencers. I was one of the early influencers when Blogspot was a thing. And I was writing. I wanted my friends to know. I wanted my community to know this is happening. And lupus is a chronic illness that disproportionately impacts Black and brown women. Black women die from it disproportionately. So I knew that our healthcare system does not care about me. So that paired with, I go to Brooklyn College. I was a women's and gender studies major, proud women's and gender studies major. And that is where I think my activism at Brooklyn College, from being a part of Students for Justice in Palestine, from really utilizing the Bangladeshi, it was like the Bangla Culture Club, Desi Club, and utilizing those spaces to bring Sakhi for South Asian survivors into our work so that we knew how to deliver these resources alongside partying or celebrating Eid, And I went on to organizing. I took on an internship at CAV. And those were the early days when I realized that my strength in relationship building is for my people. I wanted to build with my community and knew that our power lies within us. And if we're not talking to one another, and if we're not seeing the way in which we're being abandoned as an attack on our care, nobody else will. So I had the privilege of working with Kathy Dang, who is an incredible organizer, and at the same time, Fahad, executive director of Drum, just disciplined organizers who were, like, they didn't budge. There was no compromising. And so I feel like I had the mentorship and the ability to see leaders who, within the South Asian community, Muslim leaders who were absolutely like, no, we're gonna fight. We're not gonna back down. And then over the years, Qazi Fozia, Bhairavi Desai, Javaid Akhtar, I mean, there are so many leaders in the South Asian and Muslim community, and I know that there's this sort of like feeling where we're like, oh, we don't have leaders in our community. No, we have so many leaders, and the work is so damn hard. It's so damn hard, and you add being a woman and constantly getting criticized or being like, oh, she did that. Oop. So just, it's to stay in the trenches with people who recognize we are gonna make mistakes, but we have to have restorative justice practice within our community. So that, the bounty of being in the scene, the scene of the South Asian working class movement at a time when Muslim folks were in solitary confinement at MCC. We used to do vigils every month. I mean, I got to see just like what is so critically important, and so few South Asians engaged in that work. And I continued at CAV. I was organizing public housing residents, Bangladeshi public housing residents, decrepit conditions in our public housing. We in New York City have public housing stock that we're trying to protect, but public housing is a disaster. They owe so much money that they're trying to privatize. And our community is bearing the brunt of a problem that they did not create. So that work motivated, forming the Bangladeshi Feminist Collective. It informed co-founding the Muslim Writers Collective. I mean, I was just like drowning in South Asian heritage. Like, I was like, I wanna know who I am. And, I was wearing my mom's shadis. I was wearing shalwar kameez. Like, it was just a big part of my identity. And I'll just wrap by saying, I met Rebecca 10 years ago. And we used to work on language banks because we wanted to strengthen our spoken Bangla. And I remember she was at the CAB office and I was like, let's talk about patriarchy. And so she goes, okay, patriarchy is Purush Shashito Samaj. And it was just it's one of the highlights of this work that I can never forget, because that work and the continued efforts and not giving up and knowing that we've got each other's back means that we're able to continue to move forward.
We have just a little bit of time to ask any questions. If you could please ask maybe like one or two questions, but keep it really brief because we only have a little bit of time, so feel free to ask questions. Just raise your hand and shout. Anyone? Just gotta raise your hand.
I have a question. Are you working on any projects? What's the future for you?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I'm directing an episode for American Masters, but thanks to our wonderful president, we get any age grants. All of our grants are gone. So the Corporation of Public Broadcasting is gone. Before I forget, I want to basically explain why this panel is dope. So my mom, the last 2 years of her life, as you can see, she stopped speaking English. So I called up Nahar, who founded Saki. I was like, yo, Nahar, my mom's not speaking English. The doctors are getting frustrated. She's like, it was like Moses coming like to part the Red Sea. Nahar came, and she's like, I got you. Then Shamtali came, and they hooked up everything with the documents and everything. And so I felt relieved because Nahar and Shamtali like really saved me. And so it's funny because when Shamtali met my mom, all my mom kept on saying is why I'm not married. Kilai. I was like, Ma, could you just chill? So I had lunch at La Fonda on 106th Street, and Hiram Maristani, the legendary photographer who gave us those beautiful stills, he's like sarcastic. He said, you like that you got interpreters? When you go to the hospital, you know your mother has to have interpreters. That's the law. You have all that. It's document, right? Shamtali told you that. That's law. I was like, yeah. He says, do you know how your mother got that right? Because the young lawyers fought for that. So if you're Chinese, Spanish, if you're from another country and you need an interpreter, the young lawyers was the one that made that a law. And now, you know, taxi drivers who are having all these issues with insurance, it's the cab drivers that have their back. If you have a problem with someone that got shot or something, it's Drum that has your back. And the Queen of Kensington, if you have anyone, they go knocking on her door. I know you don't see their faces, but from the young lords to today, these are the people that busted their ass for us, and they deserve props. I know that wasn't an academic explanation.
If I can jump in on one thing, I think the reason we have that interpretation is because the Young Lords took militant, organized action to do that, and that required commitment and dedication to the movement and to the struggle. And so right now, we have a wonderful volunteer, Indy, who's handing out sheets for you all to sign up if you want to become a drum volunteer or neighbor. What we need in this moment are people who are willing to throw down, because victories like that take decades to build, they take years to build, and they take doing a lot of work that's not sexy and it's not fun to talk about on a panel. But it's coming to a meeting every single month with other people who want to throw down to build a better world. Because if we don't do it, ICE is going to keep kidnapping our neighbors. The fascists are going to keep taking funding for everything that makes life great. And it's on all of us. We can't rest on the laurels of Mamdani being our mayor to think that's going to save us. It is not. We elected him. Yes, we elected him, and we have to fight to make sure that this city is what it can be. We have to fight to make sure they tax the rich, and we got to fight to make sure that ICE stays out of our city and that our people stay safe. So sign up to become a drum volunteer, come to our meetings, give us a donation, learn more about our org. Yes, give money.
Thank you, everyone.